Some of Hollywood's most beloved foreign stars weren't refugees fleeing persecution. They were Nazi war criminals who escaped justice by reinventing themselves as movie stars, and the government knew exactly who they were. The space-age savior who built Hitler's V-2. The most startling example of this transformation did not happen in a movie theater, but on the television sets of millions of American families, introduced by none other than Walt Disney himself. Wernher von Braun is remembered today as the father of the American space program, the visionary genius who helped put a man on the moon. In the 1950s, he became a household name, appearing in Disney's Man in Space series. With his handsome features, charismatic smile, and enthusiastic descriptions of orbital flights, he seemed like the perfect embodiment of scientific progress. He was the friendly uncle of the space age, explaining the wonders of the cosmos to a generation of wide-eyed children, effectively selling the expensive dream of space travel to the American taxpayer. He became a celebrity scientist, gracing the covers of magazines and consulting on major films. His German accent softened into something distinguished rather than threatening. He was the architect of Tomorrowland, a symbol of American ingenuity, despite being a foreign import with a terrifying resume. However, the biography provided by Disney and the government conveniently omitted the first half of his life. Von Braun was not merely a passive scientist caught up in the war. He was an officer in the SS, holding the rank of Sturmbannführer. His brilliance had been dedicated to creating the V-2 rocket, a weapon of terror that rained destruction upon London and Antwerp. But the true horror of von Braun's legacy lay not just in the weapons he built, but in how they were constructed. The V-2 rockets were manufactured in the subterranean tunnels of the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp, a hellscape far removed from the clean, futuristic sets of the Disney studio. He was fully aware of the human cost of his inventions. He simply chose to prioritize his ambition over human life. When the first V-2 hit London, he reportedly remarked to colleagues that the rocket had worked perfectly, except for landing on the wrong planet, a chilling detachment from the carnage he had unleashed. This dissociation allowed him to compartmentalize his life, separating the technical challenge of rocketry from the moral abyss of its production. To understand the magnitude of this deception, we must look at the machine itself. While Disney showed Americans the sleek exterior designed for space travel, the internal guidance systems were built by enslaved hands under threat of the ultimate penalty. The technology was brilliant, the manufacturing was genocidal. In these cold, airless tunnels, thousands of enslaved laborers worked until they collapsed from starvation, disease, or brutal beatings. Von Braun visited this facility multiple times to inspect the production lines. He walked past the bodies, stepped over the suffering, and focused entirely on his engineering problems, complaining only when the quality of the slave labor affected the rocket's trajectory. It is estimated that 20,000 prisoners passed away in the horrific conditions of Mittelbau-Dora, a higher number than were claimed by the rockets themselves. Yet when he arrived in America, this history was sealed away. The United States needed his mind to build intercontinental ballistic missiles, and Hollywood needed a hero to sell the idea of space travel to the public. The man who had shaken hands with Himmler was repackaged as an American patriot. Every time he appeared on screen, charming the audience with his vision of the future, it was a victory of image over reality, a testament to how easily the past could be erased if the talent was useful enough. The Saturn V rocket that eventually carried Americans to the moon was a direct descendant of the V-2, meaning that the greatest triumph of American exploration was built on a foundation of Nazi engineering. The Academy Award winner, who became Goebbels' favorite. Before von Braun launched rockets, Hollywood launched the career of Emil Jannings, the very first man to win a Best Actor Academy Award. In the silent era, Jannings was a titan of the screen, renowned for his ability to portray the crumbling dignity of fallen men. When the Academy Awards were established in 1929, Jannings was the inaugural recipient, cementing his status as acting royalty. He was the toast of the town, living in a mansion on Sunset Boulevard and rubbing shoulders with the likes of Chaplin and Pickford. But his transition to sound films was difficult due to his thick German accent, which audiences found difficult to understand, and he eventually returned to his homeland in the 1930s, bitter about his rejection by the American studio system. He felt that Hollywood had discarded him, fueling a resentment that would make him an easy target for Nazi flattery. This bitterness blinded him to the moral implications of his return, leading him to view the rising regime in Berlin not as a threat, but as a patron who would finally give him the respect he felt he deserved. Back in Germany, Jannings did not retreat into retirement. Instead, he became one of the brightest jewels in Joseph Goebbels' propaganda machine. He starred in expensive, high-profile films designed to promote the ideology of the Third Reich. He was named a state actor and served on the board of the state film company, lending his immense prestige to the regime. One of his most infamous roles was in the film Kruger, a virulently anti-British production that reportedly cost over 5 million Reichsmarks to produce. The film was particularly grotesque in its historical revisionism, depicting the British as the inventors of concentration camps, a cynical projection designed to deflect from Nazi atrocities. Jannings reveled in his status, enjoying the adulation of the party elite and the personal favor of the leadership, believing that his art justified his collaboration. He allowed himself to become a cultural ambassador for fascism, attending rallies and lending his face to the glorification of the German war effort. While his former colleague Konrad Veidt fled Germany to play anti-Nazi roles in films like Casablanca, Jannings stayed to toast the regime, solidifying his choice to stand on the wrong side of history. The tragedy of Emil Jannings is a story of immense ego and the seduction of power. He believed his artistic genius placed him above morality, that an actor of his caliber was beholden only to his performance, not to politics. However, as the Allies advanced and the Third Reich crumbled, the illusion of his grandeur vanished along with the regime. In a final, pathetic scene that no screenwriter could have invented, American soldiers entering his villa found the aging, terrified actor clutching his golden Oscar statuette. He held it out like a shield, shouting, "I have an Oscar! I have an Oscar!" hoping that the symbol of his Hollywood success would protect him from the consequences of his wartime choices. The trophy that had once signified his artistic pinnacle had become his desperate plea for mercy. He was blacklisted and never worked in film again, spending his final years in bitter isolation on his farm in Austria, a fallen king who had traded his soul for a few more years of applause. His story serves as a grim warning about the dangers of vanity and the belief that talent excuses complicity, proving that even the most acclaimed accolades cannot shield one from the judgment of history. The swashbuckler, accused of treason. While Jannings operated in the open, rumors swirled that Hollywood's greatest hero, Errol Flynn, was operating in the shadows, not as a patriot, but as a spy for the Gestapo. Flynn was the ultimate swashbuckler, the man who played Robin Hood and Captain Blood, embodying the fight against tyranny on screen. Yet, biographer Charles Higham ignited a firestorm of controversy with claims that the Tasmanian-born star was sympathetic to the Axis cause. The theory suggests that Flynn's rebellious nature and disdain for authority, combined with his virulent prejudice, noted by some contemporaries, curdled into something far more sinister during the late 1930s. Flynn was known for his hedonistic lifestyle, his constant battles with studio executives, and his defiance of social norms, traits that made him vulnerable to manipulation by those who offered him excitement and validation outside the Hollywood system. His distaste for the strict rules of the studio system may have made the ordered, militaristic aesthetic of fascism strangely appealing to his contrarian nature. We aren't just talking about casual sympathy. We are talking about a timeline that puts Hollywood's biggest action hero in the same room as Nazi intelligence agents, while the world burned. The allegations center on Flynn's close friendship with Dr. Hermann Urban, an Austrian physician who was a confirmed member of the Nazi Party and an intelligence agent. The two men traveled together extensively, including a trip to the Spanish Civil War. While Flynn posed for photographs as a supporter of the Republicans fighting against fascism, the reality suggests he and Urban may have been gathering information on German socialist volunteers to feed back to intelligence services. British intelligence reportedly intercepted correspondence that raised red flags about Flynn's loyalties. fearing that he was using his celebrity status to move freely across borders without suspicion. The idea that the man who played the ultimate anti-fascist hero in Edge of Darkness was privately rooting for the other side is a chilling thought, creating a dissonance between the hero on the screen and the man behind the mask. Jack Warner, the head of Warner Brothers and a staunch anti-fascist, was reportedly terrified of what Flynn might do or say, constantly employing fixers to clean up the star's messes. Whether Flynn was a committed ideologue or simply a hedonist who allowed himself to be used by a manipulative friend remains a subject of intense debate. Some historians argue that his self-destructive behavior and addiction to chemical dependency led him into dangerous associations that he did not fully understand. But the FBI kept a substantial file on Flynn, tracking his movements and his contacts. The studio bosses, terrified of losing their biggest box office draw, worked tirelessly to suppress any whispers of treason. They spun his absences and erratic behavior as the charming quirks of a playboy, rather than the potential maneuverings of a collaborator. Flynn passed away at age 50, his body ravaged by his lifestyle, taking the full truth of his wartime loyalties to the grave, leaving behind a legacy that is forever shadowed by the question of who he really was when the cameras stopped rolling. His life became a blur of scandals, debts, and lawsuits, a tragic decline for a man who once seemed invincible. Even today, looking at his dashing smile in The Adventures of Robin Hood, one cannot help but wonder if the rogue he played was closer to his true self than the hero. The fashion icon's secret mission. Flynn's guilt remains debated, but for fashion icon and Hollywood costume designer Coco Chanel, the evidence was filed away in intelligence archives under the codename Agent F 7124. Chanel is synonymous with timeless elegance, the woman who liberated women from corsets and created the most famous perfume in history. She designed costumes for major studio productions, dressing stars like Gloria Swanson. But during the occupation of Paris, while others starved or fought in the resistance, Chanel lived in luxury at the Ritz Hotel, nestled in the arms of her lover, Baron Hans Gunther, over Dinklage, a senior German intelligence officer. She was not just a passive observer. She was an active participant in the social life of the occupier, using her connections to maintain her lavish lifestyle, while her countrymen suffered under the boot of the Wehrmacht. While the people of Paris were boiling leather to make soup, Chanel was dining on champagne and caviar. Insulated by her German lover's protection, Chanel did not merely survive the occupation, she sought to profit from it. She attempted to use the regime's Aryan laws to seize full control of her perfume empire from the Wertheimer family, her Jewish business partners who had fled to America. She petitioned the occupation authorities, arguing that the company should be hers alone as an Aryan owner. It was a ruthless business move that exploited the horrific persecution of the era for personal gain, betraying the very partners who had financed her original rise to fame. Furthermore, declassified documents reveal she traveled to Madrid and Berlin on intelligence missions, hoping to use her connections to broker a separate peace, operating under the Abwehr codename Westminster. She believed her status placed her above the conflict, a queen of fashion who could negotiate with dictators as equals. Her arrogance was such that she believed she could reshape the geopolitical map of Europe simply because she was Coco Chanel. The woman who defined chic was, in secret, an operative for the enemy. After the liberation, she was arrested and interrogated, but she was released almost immediately, allegedly due to the intervention of her friend Winston Churchill, who wished to avoid a scandal involving the British royal family. She fled to Switzerland, living in exile for years, before making a triumphant return to the fashion world in the 1950s. For decades, the scent of Chanel No. 5 masked the stench of her betrayal, proving that in the world of high style, everything, even treason, could be forgiven if the packaging was beautiful enough. Her biographers would eventually expose the truth, shattering the carefully curated image of the independent, self-made woman. The iconic interlocking C logo, worn by millions, now carries a hidden history of collaboration and opportunism that the brand struggled to suppress for half a century. Ironically, the Wertheimer family eventually regained control of the perfume business and, in a shrewd business move, paid for Chanel's luxurious post-war lifestyle to keep her quiet and protect the brand's reputation, creating a final twist where the victims subsidized the collaborator. If you are fascinated by the hidden history of the Golden Age and want to uncover more secrets that the studios tried to bury, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to bringing you the untold stories of the legends you thought you knew. The Charmer, condemned to death. Chanel's collaboration was born of greed, a cold calculation to steal a business. But for our next star, the collaboration was arguably born of survival, though the resistance didn't see it that way. The beloved French crooner Maurice Chevalier found himself performing on the world's most dangerous stage, occupied Paris, leading to a capital sentence by the resistance. Chevalier was the embodiment of Gallic charm in Hollywood, famous for his straw hat, his tuxedo, and his signature song, Thank Heaven for Little Girls. In the 1930s, he was one of the highest-paid stars at Paramount and MGM, representing the romantic ideal of the Frenchman to American audiences. When the war broke out, he returned to France and continued to perform during the occupation, a decision that would haunt him forever. While other French stars like Edith Piaf were smuggling maps to prisoners of war, Chevalier appeared to be entertaining the very soldiers who were holding them captive. Chevalier later claimed that he performed only to protect his Jewish girlfriend and to secure the release of French prisoners of war. He did indeed negotiate for the release of 10 prisoners in exchange for a performance at a prisoner camp in Germany. However, the optics were devastating. He was heard on the radio in Berlin, and the propaganda machine used his fame to suggest that life in occupied France was normal and festive. While Parisians were eating sawdust bread and freezing in unheated apartments, Chevalier was seen smiling and singing, seemingly endorsed by the occupiers. To the fighters of the resistance, risking their lives in the alleys of Paris, Chevalier's songs sounded like capitulation. He became a symbol of the gray zone of occupation, those who didn't pull a trigger but didn't fight back, trying to maintain a career while the world collapsed. He argued that he was a cultural ambassador, keeping the French spirit alive, but many saw him as a court jester for the Nazis, dancing to their tune while the country bled. Following the liberation, he was detained and threatened with the firing squad by a tribunal that viewed his actions as treason. He was eventually cleared, largely due to the lack of concrete evidence that he had actively aided the enemy beyond his performances. But the fear of that period never left him. He spent the post-war years frantically rebuilding his image, producing a documentary to explain his actions and leaning heavily on his Hollywood friends to vouch for his character. His eventual return to Hollywood in films like Gigi was a carefully managed rehabilitation. The smiling, carefree gentleman he played on screen was a mask for a man who had stared down a firing squad and spent the rest of his life trying to outrun the shadow of collaboration, knowing that his own countrymen had once marked him for elimination. His trademark smile hid a deep insecurity, a constant worry that the applause would stop and the accusations would return. He lived the rest of his life with the knowledge that his reputation had hung by a thread, salvaged only by the passage of time and the public's desire to forget the ugliness of the war. The American hero who shook Hitler's hand. Chevalier claimed he was forced to cooperate, but American aviation hero and Hollywood celebrity Charles Lindbergh willingly accepted a medal from Hermann Goering, a moment that shattered his legacy. Lindbergh was not a movie star in the traditional sense, but he was the biggest celebrity of his generation, a man whose fame eclipsed even that of Chaplin or Valentino. His solo flight across the Atlantic made him a global icon, and Hollywood courted him relentlessly. However, following the tragic kidnapping and tragic demise of his son, the crime of the century, Lindbergh grew increasingly bitter toward the American press and society. Finding solace in the ordered, disciplined society of Nazi Germany, he viewed the chaotic democracy of the United States with disdain, believing that the future belonged to strong, authoritarian regimes that could impose order on the masses. The spirit of Street Louis had made him a hero, but the spirit of Berlin was about to make him a villain. Lindbergh didn't just visit Germany, he studied their air superiority. He examined tactical formations and concluded that the German Air Force was unstoppable. a belief that led him to urge America to surrender its ideals before the fight even began. In 1938, at a dinner in Berlin, he accepted the Service Cross of the German Eagle from Göring. He wore the medal proudly, even as news of the Kristallnacht pogrom reached America weeks later. Back home, he became the face of the America First movement, delivering speeches that blamed the British, the Roosevelt administration, and the Jewish race for pushing the country toward war, rhetoric that sounded disturbingly similar to Hitler's own speeches. He traveled across the country, filling stadiums with crowds eager to hear his isolationist message, using his hero status to lend credibility to dangerous ideas. His famous speech in Des Moines, Iowa, where he questioned the loyalty of Jewish Americans, remains one of the darkest moments in the history of American celebrity. The fall of Lindbergh was swift and brutal. The public, who had once worshipped him as the lone eagle, turned on him. Hollywood studios that had once begged for the rights to his life story now treated him as radioactive. President Roosevelt privately remarked that he was convinced Lindbergh was a Nazi. When the attack on Pearl Harbor occurred, Lindbergh tried to commission into the military, but his request was refused. He ended up flying combat missions in the Pacific as a civilian consultant, desperate to redeem himself in the eyes of the nation he had alienated. His story serves as a potent reminder of how quickly a hero can become a pariah when they place their admiration for power above their country's values, and how intelligence in one field does not guarantee wisdom in another. He spent the rest of his life trying to repair his reputation, but the image of him shaking hands with Nazi leaders remained indelibly etched in the public consciousness. The man who had once united the world with his flight had succeeded in dividing his own country with his politics. The cinematic genius who sold her soul. Lindbergh admired the Luftwaffe, but Leni Riefenstahl glorified them, creating cinematic masterpieces that would serve as the visual language of the Third Reich, all while dreaming of a Hollywood career. Riefenstahl is perhaps the most complex figure in this gallery of shadows. She was a woman of undeniable genius, a director who revolutionized the way films were shot and edited. Her documentary of the 1936 Berlin Olympics, Olympia, pioneered techniques like tracking shots, underwater cameras, and slow motion that are still used in sports broadcasting today. Her diving sequences, in particular, turned the human body into abstract art. But her talent was deployed in the service of evil, creating a visual vocabulary that made fascism look beautiful, powerful, and inevitable. She was Hitler's favorite director, given unlimited budgets and access that no other filmmaker could dream of, effectively becoming the visual architect of the Nazi brand. Her most famous work, Triumph of the Will, was a propaganda film documenting the Nuremberg Rally. It transformed the Nazi Congress into a religious experience, using lighting and composition to deify Hitler, creating the myth of the Führer that seduced a nation. In 1938, shortly after the Kristallnacht pogroms, Riefenstahl arrived in Hollywood, hoping to secure an American distribution deal for Olympia and to launch a career in the American studio system. She expected to be feted as a visionary artist, oblivious to the fact that her art was providing the aesthetic cover for a regime of terror. Instead, she was met with a wall of ice. The Hollywood community, many of whom were Jewish refugees who had fled the very regime she glorified, saw through her artistic pretensions to the moral rot underneath. She was stunned that her genius was not enough to overlook her political affiliations. The Anti-Nazi League of Hollywood, led by figures like director Fritz Lang, launched a boycott against her. Most studio heads refused to meet her. The only major figure who welcomed her was Walt Disney, who gave her a private tour of his studios, a decision that he would later try to bury. Riefenstahl returned to Germany, bitter and rejected. For the rest of her long life, she maintained the fiction that she was merely an artist interested in aesthetics, not politics. She claimed she knew nothing of the Holocaust, a denial that rang hollow given her proximity to the regime's inner circle and her presence as a war correspondent in Poland. She remains a terrifying example of how beauty and art can be weaponized to seduce a nation into madness. She lived to be over 100 years old, reinventing herself as a photographer of African tribes in her later years. still obsessed with the perfect body, but never fully apologizing for the time she spent framing tyranny as salvation. The siren who replaced Marlene Dietrich. When Marlene Dietrich fled to Hollywood to fight the Nazis, Zara Leander stepped in to fill her shoes, becoming the highest-paid star in the Third Reich, and the woman Hitler hoped would rival MGM's greatest icons. Leander was Swedish, not German, and she possessed a sultry contralto voice and a commanding screen presence that made her a superstar. When Dietrich refused Hitler's offer to return to Germany, the propaganda ministry turned to Leander to become the new screen goddess of the New Order. She was the distraction the regime needed, a glamorous figure to keep the populace entertained while the world burned around them. Her films were melodramas that allowed audiences to weep over fictional tragedies rather than the real ones unfolding in the streets. She was dubbed the Nazi Garbo, a title that flattered her vanity but sealed her fate as a symbol of the regime's cultural ambitions. She signed a contract with UFA, the German film studio, demanding and receiving a salary paid in Swedish kroner, which she deposited safely in Stockholm banks. She became the face of German musical cinema, singing songs like Davon geht die Welt nicht unter, The World Won't End, because of this, which became anthems for the soldiers at the front. She lived in a magnificent villa in the fashionable district of Berlin-Dahlem, attending parties with the regime's elite. She claimed she was apolitical, a neutral Swede simply doing a job. But her films were essential tools for keeping morale high in a country engaged in a genocidal war. She provided the soundtrack for the Third Reich, her deep voice echoing on radios from Paris to Stalingrad. She was the velvet glove over the iron fist, providing a soft, romantic face to a brutal ideology. However, as the tide of war turned and the cities began to burn, Leander realized she was trapped in a gilded cage. When her villa was bombed, she fled back to Sweden in 1943, leaving behind the regime that had made her rich. But escape was not so simple. After the war, she was shunned by the international film community. Her films were banned, and she was viewed as a collaborator who had sold her voice to the enemy for a paycheck. She spent years trying to perform again, facing protests and boycotts wherever she went. She had gambled that her talent would outlast the politics of the era, but she learned too late that some associations leave a stain that no amount of stardom can wash away. She eventually found a niche audience in gay cabaret culture, a strange second act for a woman who had once been the toast of totalitarianism. She died in 1981, still insisting she was just an entertainer, never understanding that in a total war, entertainment is a weapon. We've covered spies, directors, and divas. Which other controversial Golden Age figure should we investigate? Tell us in the comments below, and let us know which era of Hollywood history you want us to uncover next. The double agent in the Führer's box. Zara Leander sang for the Nazis, but Olga Chekova may have been doing something far more dangerous, dining with Hitler while secretly reporting to Moscow. Chekova was a Russian-born actress who became one of the biggest stars of the German cinema. She was a favorite of Adolf Hitler, who admired her aristocratic beauty and elegant performances. Photographs show her sitting next to the Führer at gala dinners, laughing and conversing intimately. She was honored as a state actress of the Third Reich and enjoyed the full protection of the regime, living a life of extraordinary privilege while her homeland was being invaded by the very men she dined with. She navigated the treacherous waters of Nazi high society with the grace of a seasoned diplomat. Always smiling, always watching, her performance at dinner parties perhaps even more skillful than her work on screen. But beneath the diamonds and the furs lay a secret that would have meant her immediate liquidation. Chekova was the niece of the playwright Anton Chekhov and the sister of Lev Nipper, a composer living in the Soviet Union. This family connection gave the Soviet intelligence agency, the NKVD, leverage over her. Declassified Soviet files suggest that she was a sleeper agent, activated to provide insight into the mood and plans of the Nazi leadership. It is rumored that Lavrentiy Beria, the head of the Soviet secret police, personally managed her file, seeing her as a vital asset deep within the lion's den. She was playing a role far more complex than any script she had ever been given, balancing on a knife's edge where a single slip could mean torture and death. There are even stories that she was involved in a failed plot to assassinate Hitler, though these remain unconfirmed legends of the espionage world. Her position was incredibly precarious. She was acting the role of the loyal German star for Hitler, while arguably playing the role of the loyal Soviet patriot for Stalin, all to protect her family back in Russia. When the Red Army finally conquered Berlin, Chekova was not arrested or assaulted like so many other women. Instead, Soviet officers were stationed at her home to protect her. She was flown to Moscow for a debriefing with high-ranking officials, then returned to Berlin, where she was allowed to live in relative comfort. The specific details of what she told Moscow remain locked in the archives, but her survival in the snake pit of Berlin is a testament to her extraordinary ability to play the ultimate double role. She died in Munich in 1980, taking the full extent of her espionage activities to her grave, leaving historians to wonder just how much the state actress really knew. Her life reads like a thriller that Hollywood would deem too implausible to film. My heart is French, but my body is German. While Chekova played a dangerous political game, the French star Arletty played a dangerous romantic one, engaging in a passionate affair with a Luftwaffe officer that would lead to her imprisonment. Arletty was the soul of Parisian cinema, the star of Children of Paradise, widely considered one of the greatest French films ever made. This masterpiece was filmed under the most difficult conditions of the occupation, with hungry extras and Jewish crew members hiding in the sets. Yet, while working on this symbol of French culture, Arletty was living a very different reality. She fell deeply in love with Hans-Jürgen Soering, a German officer. They lived together openly at the Ritz and the George V, ignoring the hatred of the Parisians suffering under the German boot. To her, love was above politics. To her neighbors, it was a slap in the face. She was the queen of the Paris theater scene, and her visible consorting with the enemy felt like a personal betrayal to her adoring fans. Arletty refused to apologize for her love life. When she was arrested at the Liberation, her defense was shockingly blunt. She famously told her interrogators, "My affections are French, but my body is German." Alternatively, she is quoted as saying, "If you didn't want us to have intimate relations with them, you shouldn't have let them in." It was a statement of defiant individualism in the face of national trauma. She saw her relationship as a private matter, separate from the war, but her country saw it as sleeping with the enemy. While women accused of similar horizontal collaboration were having their heads shaved in the streets, paraded through towns in humiliation, Arletty's fame saved her from physical assault, but not from disgrace. The image of the shaved women became a symbol of the liberation's dark side, a purge of female sexuality that Arletty narrowly escaped. She maintained a haughty dignity throughout her trial, refusing to see herself as a villain for following her heart. She was imprisoned for months and her career was derailed at its absolute peak. She was forbidden from working for 3 years. The tragedy of Arletty is the collision of personal freedom with collective responsibility. She believed love transcended borders and uniforms, but she discovered that in times of war, there is no private life. Her vertical collaboration, as it was termed, cost her the prime years of her artistic life, leaving her a legend tainted by her choice of lover. Even decades later, the shadow of her German officer remained, a permanent footnote to her cinematic brilliance. She lived out her later years in Paris, gradually going blind, a solitary figure reflecting on a life where she had followed her heart straight into the center of a storm she refused to acknowledge. Her blindness became a poignant metaphor for her wartime years. She had chosen not to see the swastika on her lover's uniform, seeing only the man beneath. The king who abdicated for the Reich. Arletty lost her freedom for love, but the Duke of Windsor gave up a throne. His exile brought him into the glittering orbit of Hollywood, where his Nazi sympathies became the era's worst-kept secret. King Edward VIII abdicated the British throne to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson, becoming the Duke of Windsor. The couple became international celebrities, drifting between Europe and the United States, often socializing with Hollywood royalty. But behind the romance of the abdication lay a dark political reality. The Duke and Duchess were ardent admirers of the German regime, viewing Hitler as a bulwark against communism and a strong leader who could bring order to Europe. They were dazzled by the spectacle of the Third Reich, ignoring the brutality that sustained it. Wallis, in particular, was rumored to have had an affair with Nazi official Joachim von Ribbentrop, further fueling the suspicions of British intelligence. They visited Hitler at his mountain retreat in 1937, where the Duke was photographed giving a Nazi salute. During the war, while Britain fought for its survival, the Windsors were considered a major security risk. The German High Command even devised Operation Willy, a plot to kidnap the Duke and reinstall him as a puppet king once Britain was conquered. The Duke was reportedly loose-lipped while staying in neutral Lisbon, expressing pessimistic views about Britain's chances of winning the war, comments that could have been devastating to morale if publicized. The FBI monitored the couple closely whenever they were on American soil, compiling a dossier that detailed their questionable associations. J. Edgar Hoover himself was deeply suspicious of the Duke, viewing him as a potential liability to Allied security. The discovery of the Marburg files after the war confirmed the extent of their treacherous communications, though the royal family worked hard to suppress the documents for decades. To contain the threat, Winston Churchill essentially banished the Duke to the Bahamas, making him the governor of the tiny colony to keep him far away from the European theater and German influence. It was a gilded exile, a way to keep him busy and out of trouble. In the Bahamas, and later in their post-war life, the Windsors continued to mingle with movie stars and tycoons, their treasonous inclinations glossed over by the sheen of royalty. Hollywood studios, ever respectful of titles, treated them as tragic romantics rather than potential traitors. The couple spent the rest of their lives in a bubble of luxury, their dark political alliances hidden behind the flashbulbs of the paparazzi, forever drifting in a world of privilege that insulated them from the consequences of their dangerous beliefs. They became professional guests, dining out on their former glory, while the world tried to forget how close they had come to selling out their country. The man who was born to be king ended up as a sad, wandering celebrity, his potential legacy of leadership replaced by a legacy of selfishness and poor judgment. The invisible men who built the blockbusters. Our final chapter isn't about a single star, but the silent influx of German technicians, stuntmen, and scientists brought over by Operation Paperclip, who quietly integrated into the Hollywood machine. While von Braun became the public face, hundreds of others vanished into the technical departments of the major studios. These were the men who had advanced the science of color film, magnetic tape recording, and widescreen lenses in the laboratories of the Third Reich technologies, often developed for military surveillance or propaganda purposes. For example, the German magnetophone tape technology, discovered by Allied troops, revolutionized the American music industry and was championed by stars like Bing Crosby, who used it to pre-record his radio shows. This technology, born from the need to broadcast Hitler's speeches clearly, became the foundation of the American recording industry. The very microphone you hear your favorite songs on may trace its lineage back to a Berlin bunker. This silent migration is perhaps the most unsettling legacy of all. It wasn't just about obscure equipment. The very three-strip Technicolor cameras used to film American classics like The Wizard of Oz or Gone with the Wind relied on optical precision that was refined by German optics engineers imported after the war. The Agfacolor process developed in Germany heavily influenced American film stock development. The vibrant colors of Hollywood's golden age were, in some cases, calibrated by eyes that had previously looked through the sights of bombers. The industry absorbed this expertise without asking questions. The goal was to create the most spectacular entertainment possible, and if the expertise came from the enemy, so be it. The transition from black and white to color, from mono to stereo, was accelerated by the very regime that had sought to plunge the world into darkness. Even the widescreen format of CinemaScope owes a debt to lens technology developed for German tank periscopes, a chilling reminder that the tools of war are easily repurposed for the tools of wonder. It suggests that the golden age of Hollywood was built, in part, on the ruins of Europe. The Dream Factory was pragmatic, willing to overlook the past for the sake of a better picture, a clearer sound, or a more convincing special effect. It forces us to look at the classic films we love with new eyes, recognizing that the magic on screen was sometimes crafted by hands that had served a very different master. The credits may not list their names, but their fingerprints are all over the celluloid history of the 20th century. It serves as a reminder that progress often comes with a moral price tag, and that the line between innovation and complicity is often blurred in the pursuit of perfection. We cannot unknow the source of these marvels, but we can choose to view them with a more critical, informed perspective. If this deep dive into Hollywood's darkest history opened your eyes, please like and share this video. It helps us continue to research and produce these in-depth documentaries. These 12 stories reveal a complicated truth about the Golden Age. We tend to view that era through a lens of nostalgia, seeing it as a time of moral clarity and simple elegance. But the reality was far more murky. The studios were businesses first and moral guardians second. They protected investments, whether that meant covering for Errol Flynn's alleged espionage or rebranding Werner von Braun as a Disney hero. They built a wall of silence around their stars, a wall that is only now beginning to crumble as archives are opened and secrets are revealed. The carefully constructed myths are finally giving way to the messy, uncomfortable reality of human history. The studio system was a machine designed to manufacture perfection, but the raw materials were often deeply flawed human beings. The stars we admire were human beings navigating a world on fire. Some, like Arletty, made choices for love that destroyed them. Others, like Lindbergh and Jannings, were seduced by ideology and ego. And some, like von Braun, were simply too useful to be punished. As we watch their films today, we don't have to stop enjoying their performances, but we owe it to history to understand the full context of their lives. The shadows they cast are just as important as the light they projected. We can appreciate the art while condemning the artist's choices, holding two conflicting ideas in our minds at once. It is a sign of maturity to see the world in shades of gray rather than just black and white. Understanding their flaws does not erase their talent, but it does strip away the false idol of perfection, allowing us to see them as they truly were, complicated figures in a complicated time. Peeling back the curtain on the Golden Age isn't always easy. It forces us to reconcile the dazzling performances we love with the complicated and sometimes dark realities of the people behind them. But at Golden Age Files, we believe that knowing the whole truth doesn't diminish the history, it only makes it more real. If you appreciate this kind of deep dive investigative storytelling, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's the best way to support our work and ensure you never miss an untold story. And I'm curious, did today's list change how you view any of your favorite films? Or do you believe we should separate the art from the artist? Let's discuss it in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and for keeping the memory of old Hollywood alive, shadows and all. I'll see you in the next video.